Hey everyone, this is Chris from DSX Machina, and this is a very late video, but I'm back to doing some uploads. I hope to be a bit more regular with my videos, and perhaps maybe eventually get some original content, but I've been concentrating on mostly writing for the last few months, and dealing with the success of this book, Ultramodern 5. I was supposed to give out a preview before the book's release. That never happened, and several months passed, and now this is more of a retrospective of the success of this book. And I have to say thank you to everybody. My God, this has been astounding. I went on vacation the day this thing got out, and I was able to track the sales. And I'll tell you, riding the passenger seat, mind you, with my girlfriend driving, and constantly getting notes from my phone from all the sales, or moving between coverage zones, and then entering a coverage zone and getting 10 or 15 notices of book sales, and then going through a whole 2 weeks like that, waking up in the morning and noticing 20 books have been sold and thinking, oh, that's nice, and then getting 20 books the next day, and then 20 the next day after that, and then 25 and 25. And it was astounding. I've never had a release like that, and it's the first book we had that reached Electrum, although we've had actually Quintessence reach, I think reached Electrum recently, but it's also the first and currently only book that we have that reached Platinum, which is the first. That's just astounding. That's just amazing. So obviously I became more encouraged to put out more content, and that's why we have Apex and Neurospastic coming out. I'm not ignoring Amethyst at all. That's the next book right after Neurospast is released, but I wanted to talk to people about Ultramodern, and for those people who don't know, and for those people who do know, talk about some of the things that have come up. So this is just a quick little glance of the book. Now, it's available on RPG Now, Drive-Thru RPG, and so forth. The download actually has several files. There is a normal version, which is quite large, 200 megabytes, and then there's a compressed, optimized version that's 60. There's also a low ink version for people who want to print their own, although there is a print-on-demand version out. And then there's the errata, which I try to update best I can. It's still, I think, only about 3 or 4 pages. Well, I'm doing pretty well on that. There have been some people that have made comments about the fact that, with the errata having been updated twice, it's like the game wasn't done well. Like I said, that's the matter of games. Computer games get updated, and even 5th edition D&D. Dungeons & Dragons has updates. 4th edition had updates. 4th edition had an update that was 24 pages long. 5th edition has 34 entries. Ours has, I think, 12. So I think we're doing pretty good. So this is a science fiction / modern rule system that can be adapted to any system that you wanted to use. So regardless from the time period, from 18th century to far future, you can basically use anything. I did make some people assume that we were including rules for specific time periods, but that wasn't really in the plan. The design was to have a base rule system and then hopefully create setting books for each time period. So we have a superhero story with Apex and a cyberpunk story, and then maybe we'll do a steampunk setting and or perhaps a giant robot one, which I have to admit I'm currently kind of thinking seriously about actually addressing. But I wanted to let people know about how the philosophy works with this setting, very specifically about the kind of limited rules. We didn't want to create a new rule system. I didn't want to take the 5th edition philosophy and tear it apart. I wanted to keep it relatively straightforward, which was, I know, something that people complained when 4th edition Amethyst came out. It was breaking a lot of the idea of D&D philosophy. And I had problems with that statement because a lot of people couldn't define what that philosophy meant. I use that terminology sometimes, but I usually in reference to making sure that whatever books I have are still at least compatible mechanically to the base systems, where some people are actually expecting some systems to take the system and break them apart to make them compatible with their setting rather than the other way around. Now, Amethyst, of course, the setting comes first, but when you're creating a universal system like Ultramodern, I felt it important to make it completely compatible with the base system, which was 5th edition rules. And oddly enough, some people actually took issue with that. They felt that the Ultramodern system should be self-enclosed. It should not be compatible with 5th edition fantasy, primarily because 5th edition fantasy has certain assumptions. Characters are more indestructible, monsters are larger, they have a lot of hit points, but when you're dealing with a person-to-person combat system, it should be a system where you miss most of the time. When you hit, the person is severely injured. And the idea of having large robots with 300 hit points and characters that have 100 hit points Problem is that if we change that system, then you can't create your own fantasy science fiction hybrid setting or do anything with the monsters from these other books. So I felt it really important to make it compatible. So that meant a traditional staggered way of achieving hit points, a normal way of doing monsters. I didn't want to break. We were going to include new mechanics, but I didn't want to erase the mechanics of the previous system. I felt that very important. It's not stopping other people from playing with that system, playing with this system, and I've been thinking of putting out a deviation, an optional system that allows people to adapt the system so it is more realistic, but that will of course make it incompatible with a traditional fantasy game. And we'll go into the details in that in a little bit later, but as you can see, we only include a few things. There's a very basic auto-fire rule, which is identical to the one in almost identical to one in 5th edition DMG. And then we expand in demolitions and engineering, computer use for crafting, recovering hit points on technology, and sabotaging. And then we have a basic science skill, a vehicle proficiency, which is actually under vehicle tools, a few new feats, and then we have ladders. Now ladders are a new mechanic. They were carried over from 4th edition D&D. Ladders are basically a batch of feats that you get in sequence with a first level ability that changes your primary attack damage modifier. And we have the options here. They don't break the system and you can ignore them, or you can include them into your traditional 5th edition fantasy game as well. And then we have our classes here, and we'll go into details there. There are some classes that follow the kind of mechanical styles of 5th edition, and there are some that create new mechanics. So it's a mix of the two. One of the biggest things I did here is play with the background system. Whenever I run a game, I very, very often use this life path system from a previous old late 80s role-playing game, which I won't mention. And I use that even today. And I felt that this was an opportunity to create a new one for people and create a system where you create your basic life path, which are much more simplistic than the backgrounds in 5th edition, and then have the character be able to greatly adjust that through either their choices or through their roles. A much more expanded life path system, which is much more advanced. I have not received a lot of complaints about this. It's I think it's a cool system. I use it a lot. And I'm now using this one and replacing to the one I used to use. So you can roll for your parents, if they're alive or dead, if you have siblings, how they're doing. You can roll for life events where good or bad things can happen, and so forth. And these are big tragedies. You can actually impede yourself, or you can give yourself a windfall. And I try to keep them relatively balanced. You can make friends and enemies and so forth. And this is a pretty expanded system, but I think most people like it. And there have been a few people that have complained that rolls can really screw you if you're not careful or give you imbalancing bonuses. And this is one of those situations where this is meant to be fun, folks. And if there's someone who's trying to abuse the system, or if somebody gets a lot of bonuses or a lot of negatives, then the GM should rightly step in to try to balance the system. But this is meant to just to be fun. And I don't know a single person I've ever played with that has not jumped at this. Even though we don't use that previous system from the 80s anymore, I give people an option, and they always love this idea. They love leaving up to chance. They can roll for these numbers, but they don't. They prefer to roll randomly. They don't want to choose. So I think that's very interesting. So we get into ladders here, and like I said, ladders they give you a first level ability, which is pretty simplistic, usually in this case replacing dexterity instead of strength and so forth. And then instead of your primary ability bonuses, you get this ability instead, which is kind of replacing your feat. So you don't have to get each one, but you have to get the previous one in order to get the next one up. So if you get a feat here and here, when you reach, say, 12th level, you can't get natural athlete. You have to get cat balance. So you miss out on some of the higher level abilities. And then these ladder gains are added in there to basically give you pre-designed magic items. And that's in there. If you're going to include magic items in your game, or for example in Neurospatial where you have cybernetics, you can ignore this ability. This is meant to balance characters that are not going to have magic items. And so Runner is a dex-based, Savant is intelligence-based, Survivor is wisdom and constitution, then we have a Veteran, which is also wisdom, Warrior, which is strength, and so forth. So there's one that tries to concentrate on each primary modifier, but you're not hooked on that. So because Savant, for example, is both intelligence and wisdom, and Runner can be dexterity or intelligence or so forth. And then we get to classes. Now classes, once again, there's a lot of classes. The first thing you'll notice is that there are no archetypes for the classes. The archetypes have been pulled out and they're separated, so you don't have to pick between 3 archetypes. You can choose any of the archetypes, and there are some archetypes that are obviously beneficial to certain classes, but you're not forced to take them. So you can take a grounder and grab an archetype that would fit well with the face, for example, or vice versa. The face is a non-combat class, so it's not based around combat. This is another thing we'll address because this is an ultra-modern game, so not all classes have to be just ass kickers. And the grounder is the ass kicker. Once again, this is very similar to a fighter, so it's very similar mechanically to the fighter. The gunslinger, not so much. Gunslinger is kind of his own thing. So with 5th edition rules, there is something about the way the classes are built. The damage value of your character goes up considerably throughout the levels, but your attack bonuses don't really change so much. So you can potentially have a lot of lower level of opponents to offset instead of one giant opponent, because they can have an AC that you can still potentially miss, but your damage bonuses are considerably higher. You look at the rogue, for example. The rogue in 5th edition can deal a lot of damage out in 20th level by a simple dagger, but that brings up a conversation point dealing with damage values very specifically. So gunslingers, with the going back to the grounder, the grounder's a damage ability comes with a lot of bullets. Gunslinger gets a lot of attacks. So even though he doesn't do a lot of damage per attack like a fighter or a rogue, the gunslinger can have a lot of attacks, and that's where he or she gets the extra damage. The heavy is very much if going back to the old style of controlling large groups of targets. It's not like a spellcaster, but he does have a lot of area effects, so that's his ability. Infiltrator is very rogue-like, so once again, but we didn't put in a kind of sneak attack ability. So they have other ways of doing a single attack with a lot of damage. The Marshal is your commander, so has area effects to help or impede. So that's very much helping other players. So not much useful on his own, but definitely useful and extremely powerful in a group. Martial Artist, very monk-like, but we've taken the paranormal elements out and combined it with more traditional fighting. Right, and we used a system called combos. Basically, you can string consecutive hits and then cook off a finishing move, which does a lot of damage. So that's where they get their additional damage. They can cook off 2 or 3 attacks and then cook off a tier 4 finishing move, which does a massive amount of damage or impeding effects. And then Medic, which is, as you can see, very much based off of a cleric. So they have a kind of a spell list. And so their abilities are like spells, so they're very much healing based. Very few abilities that impose status effects on enemies. It's mostly about healing. And the Sniper goes back to being rogue, but more of a ranged rogue, and they have once again abilities to mostly impede. So where the Infiltrator likes to do a lot of damage, the Sniper likes imposing a lot of effects. Although he can do a lot of damage, his thing's about trying to impede movement and so forth. And then we move into the archetypes. And as I mentioned before, archetypes are pulled off from classes, so you can pick any archetype you want. There's a lot here, quite a few. Then we go into equipment, and the first thing, and let's address it right away, the damage values of the weapon. So you look at a break action shot pistol does 1d8, capacitor pistol does 1d6. Someone says, wait a second, you're telling me a plasma pistol only does the same amount of damage as a club? How is that realistic? Now, let's talk about things realistically here. When most people, almost every single time I talk to someone about the damage comparisons, they always compare a pistol to a bow. Now we know that a bow does about 1d8 to 1d10 depending on the type of bow, right? And that's in scale with the bolt rifles and the shotguns and so forth, because most people ignore the fact that a greatsword does 1d10 to 2d6. So you would imagine, say, wait a second, a shotgun should do more damage than an arrow, but you're saying that a shotgun should do 2 or 3 times more damage than a greatsword, and that becomes equally as arbitrary. And that's the ultimate thing. Damage values are arbitrary. They're arbitrary with the original 5th edition system, and they're arbitrary now. This is about a role-playing game. It's not meant to simulate real life. It wasn't simulating real life with 5th edition. It's not going to simulate real life with any other system compatible with 5th edition. If we were to do this compatible, all these damage values would of course go up, but then characters would be dying left and right unless they used other including other factors, greatly increasing AC, so very few people ever connected, and if you did connect, the character would be cripply injured, and you would also do away with most leveling system because people don't get magically that much more powerful. They would go, you'd only have a 5 or 6 level system. In fact, there's a system out there which is another, a modern 5th edition rule system which only has 10 levels. And that can work because the moment you go above 10 levels, that system doesn't work anymore. But at that point, it's not compatible with any 5th edition system that you want to play. If you want to combine it with 5th edition fantasy, it just doesn't work because there's no more levels above 10. And at first level, the characters are overpowered because their weapons do 2 or 3 times more damage than the 5th edition fantasy variations. So we want to keep the weapons in line with 5th edition philosophy, using that word. But remember, these damage values are not isolated. These damage values go up considerably based on the class. So a grounder, of course, is using automatic weapons, so the damage value of the Scout's Repeater goes up to 1 die 10 from 1 die 8. Plus, it's an auto weapon, so he gets to use his auto abilities, which then can greatly decrease his damage once again. Plus, it has the magnetic property, which allows it to, which gives it some other additional features. It has the armor piercing value, which means it counts as being magical and adamantine, so it does even more. So a lot of people look at this value and they don't look at this value and they don't look at the class that's going to be applied to it. You compare it to a sniper rifle, something like the sensor gun here, 1 die 8, 10 shots, sniper +2, so he's going to have a +2 to hit. It's a guided weapon, which means if he misses, it can actually get a second attack. So there's tons of bonuses right here. And once again, the sniper can do a lot more damage with this weapon. He can do 5 or 6 times, or if not, maybe 8 or 9, 10 times more damage with this weapon based on what level he is and what abilities he's using. So these systems are balanced. When we get into the larger weapons, things get a little bit unbalanced, but we're not expecting these characters to wield these weapons at first level. Like these weapons here, which do 1 die 10 plus 10, and you combine that with some of these abilities that these grounders get, this becomes an incredibly powerful weapon. The balancing effect is that this is not a weapon you will be able to use all the time. It's super heavy. You mount these on vehicles or you put them on powered armor. So that's where we kind of create some of the balancing effect here. But with the starting weapons, or the weapons that you would wield normally, the most of the damage value comes from your class and not the weapon, which is in line with 5th edition rules. And then we have some melee weapons that go along with it. And then we have the armor, and most of the armor, once again, is exactly in line with 5th edition rules, with the exception of the exo armor, which is powered armor. Now the exo armor is very much different because the exo armor is like armor plus 4 or 5 magical items slapped in place, which is the reason why they're generally a lot more expensive, as you can see. These are all exo armor, so they're way more expensive, and they're usually 4 or 5 magic items as well as a magic armor all combined into one, so they're extremely powerful. And once again, hopefully the GM knows how to balance that system out, because a character having one and then having all the other abilities go along with it, hopefully this is one of those situations where 1 or 2 guys are responsible for combat and 1 or 2 characters are responsible for the leadership or the other abilities of the group. If you have 5 characters all with power armor, you better hit them with some very powerful opponents because they're going to be very powerful themselves. We have armor modifications because armor can be modified. And then we have general equipment, which is not much because you can still use your equipment from 5th edition books. And gas mask. Then we have vehicles. Vehicles are tool proficiency, so we didn't really play with the vehicles that much. Your vehicles right here gives them your armor class, whether or not they have a disadvantage with maneuvering abilities here, their speed. Now their speed seems pretty slow, but this speed is their acceleration, which you can add to it. So an APC can add 30 feet to its speed every single round. So it can, and it has a top speed of, I think, 5 or 6 times that. So a sports car of 50 feet, that's not its current speed, that's just its acceleration. So you can get it to 250 feet per round or more. So when you look at those numbers don't reflect the actual speed of the item, of the vehicle in question. And the same thing we'll get into with aircraft. We have a lot of descriptions and abilities for aircraft here. Not a lot of aircraft, just because I didn't think a lot of people would be wielding them all the time, but they are here. And then modifications for vehicles, because of course people like modifying things. Then we get to antagonists and opponents. Now, one thing about these opponents is the fact that you'll see these things called adversaries. Adversaries, you basically can apply one of these templates, like drone or ironclad or regimented unit, to all of the adversaries in a battle. So these ill-equipped combatants, for example, you can give them all the drone ability, and they all become robots. And that's a way of creating these very generic characters and creating them very specific to a situation. So they can be a mob, they can be regimented or trained. A hive is another kind of perhaps alien or robotic ability. So these classes or these monsters are all very generic. They're given kind of goofy names: phallic compensator, machine gun menace, but these are just basically place markers. You can make them whatever you want. You can turn this guy into a drone or an alien just by applying the right ability. And there's quite a few of them, all the way to challenge rating, I think 18 or 17 or 15 or 16 or so. And then the big boss, 16. There's a 19 there. Powered armor are generic monsters, so they're not you can't apply an affiliation bonus to them, but they're still powerful on their own. And there's a few of those guys, giant mechs and so forth. These guys pop up a lot in Retrospective, which is the cyberpunk game coming out. There's two adventures at the back of this book, but we wanted to talk about how to create modern adventuring, and this is what this chapter is about. We have a lot of generic maps with generic locations and so forth, as well as action set pieces that you can include in your own adventure. So this allows you to create your own modern or futuristic setting. So we have your generic road, we have your generic office building, compounds, and so forth. And then after that, we have applications, which are little tiny action set pieces. These are not adventures, these are just action set pieces in order to insert them in your traditional adventure, however you see fit. And then at the end of it, we have two modules. We have this one called Biohazard, which is an older module that we had written. This is a zombie apocalypse. And so there's monsters at the end of that game as well. Traditional kind of zombies, very much inspired by computer game zombie adventures. And then we have Invasion Proxy, which is another invasion, but this one's an alien invasion story dealing with aliens instead of zombies. It's higher level. It's getting a bit dated now, I will admit, because this is 2017, and this is almost becoming an alternate reality setting because it deals with the Green Zone and other aspects of Baghdad during the occupation, and that's not really applicable anymore, but I just didn't want to go in there and update it. I think it's a cool little parallel universe story. And obviously there are giant robots in that fight there as well. It's a larger adventure. And then they have their own monsters. So there's even more monsters than before. And then there you go. That is the full. We have a whole bunch of NPCs, which you guys can insert into your book, and then larger versions of all the maps. Right? So there's been a few changes in the errata. One of the first ones we dealt with involve the fact that we wanted to enforce that vehicles were a tool proficiency, not a skill. There have been a few examples when they're mentioned as a skill. And so the errata is about 4 or 5 pages and deals with that kind of stuff. But it's been a very successful book, and I hope to build on that with further books. In fact, we have already Apex, which is out already, and Neurospastal, which will be out probably within a week of this video's posting. And it's been really successful and quite fun. And I have to admit once again that I've been blown away at the support. You guys have been fantastic, and I love you all for doing this. And next up is another expansion for Amethyst, which of course uses 5th edition, as well as all the other systems. It uses Savage World and 13th Age and Pathfinder as well. But I really hope to put out more content compatible with Ultramodern to continually support this system, because it's been really successful. I want to back people's play on this. I want to make sure that they know that we're here, and I will continue to produce content. It's been interesting because I've finally reached a point after so many years writing that I'm close to being able to quit my day job and write full-time for both my other writing, my novel work, as well as my game work. And if that's possible, then I'd be able to put out content a lot more. But you guys have been fantastic. I really hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope this addressed some of the issues with the game. I know I won't satisfy some people. There have been some people that have disliked the idea that there isn't a errata, but it's just a matter of the beast. And there's some people who just won't be satisfied with the damage values. They think the damage values are too low. But the people who have purchased the game that have praised it do understand how the system's supposed to work. If you create weapons that are too powerful, then first level characters are overpowered, and they continually be overpowered throughout the whole game. And the only way to counter that is to create a system which negates the implementation of 5th edition fantasy. And that's something we didn't want to do. And we may address that with an expansion where we give you the tools necessary to create a ultra-realistic something that's more akin to what people may be looking for. But there are a lot of people out there who want to create their own fantasy science fiction stories. They want to combine them with their favorite settings, and they feel that they want to continue to use this, fifth edition books, other books that Ultramodern are compatible with from other publishers. And we shouldn't be denying them by creating a system that's completely isolated. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and thank you again for the great sales. I hope to put out more content, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.